Welcome to the Final Frontiers radio show, where we spotlight inspiring missionary endeavors around the globe. Stay tuned to hear how you can personally get involved, helping the Lord's frontline soldiers effectively advance the gospel where it has never been preached before. In this episode, we have a Final Frontiers debriefing interview of a trip taken to William Carey's church in Kolkata, India. We'll also have a discussion with a young lady whose heart for mission spurred her on to take every opportunity while growing up to travel and help on foreign fields. And we'll have an update on educational material recently provided to national preachers in Kenya, Africa.
So you just went to India, and one of the things my dad wanted to do specifically was to actually go to Calcutta to visit William Carey's church. Could you tell me about that?
Yes, that was such an honor, such a blessing. He had a contact that he hadn't seen in years. I mean, some of those guys I know he hasn't seen in like 15 years in Calcutta. And so we tried to get a hold of him, and Taran, it was his name. And at first, we didn't know if we were going to be able to get there and everything, but he just said, just come, and we'll see what we can do. Mm-hmm. And I was in contact with him before I went to India, and then kind of throughout. And so I got into Calcutta and got a place to stay, got in touch with him and everything. We set up times the next day, and he said, yeah, brother, just come. And so I was supposed to meet him at a certain time. Well, I had to go get train tickets because I was going to be leaving the next day. Right. Honestly, I only had a very short time. And so I went to one of the biggest train stations. I think it is the biggest in Calcutta, and it is crazy. The Howrah station. Huh. Crazy station. And figured out how to get my tickets ready. And then I was supposed to meet this guy at such and so time. And it was kind of a wild thing there. My phone ran out of minutes and I couldn't get in touch with him. And so he said, hey, while you're waiting for me, go down to the Ganges River, which is honestly right behind the train station. Right there. And so you have what they call ghats all the way along the Holy River. And Calcutta is one of the main places where that river will come through. You see people going down the steps, the wide steps, and they're called ghats. And so all through the city, you see people going down to bathe and to do the ritualistic bathing in the Ganges or the Mother Ganga River. Very, very special to those people. So I spent some time down there. I got to wander along the river, just incredibly deep, grimy mud, which I can explain a little why later. It's just a nasty, dirty river, really. Right. And people will say that, but it's precious to them. Sure. So I got to meet some kids along there. There was one spot where I saw these old cast-out idols, especially of the elephant god, and you're walking along there and just mud and just dirt and trash and everything, and there's this one kid who's just completely caked in mud. He's just playing in the mud and then washing off in the river, and he's got several friends, and he came over, and I was getting a picture of this cast-out idol from the people, and getting the Ganges River in the back, and he leans down. It's one of my favorite shots. It's neat it's sad, but it's amazing to see how these people live. So Taran finally gets a hold of me, and I'm wandering the streets to get back up, trying to find a taxi that will actually take me there. And some of them are good, and some of them aren't so good. Right. And sometimes you end up with some crazy guy, and I ended up with a guy who I decided later he had to have been legal, not having a license, because he was scared of the police and everything. Oh, wonderful. And we were racing through the streets, and he could not figure out where to take me. And Taran had said, try to find this church. It's in the middle of a certain street. You're only like 10 minutes away from it. Uh-huh. And he said, just tell the taxi driver. And so we finally get there. He drops me off at this big white Catholic church. And that was our meeting point because it was obvious to see.
It's easier to find, right?
But right beside that church is the grounds of the old college for William Carey. And he wanted to show that to me. Just right across the street was where he went to college. Okay. And Taran is, I think in his 70s, something like that. And he has recently just had several stents put in his heart. He's had some major issues and has needed a lot of prayer. He really shouldn't be alive. Huh. And God miraculously healed him. So we're walking down the streets in Calcutta together, having met for the first time, and we're just talking about stuff, and he's telling me all this, that really it's a miracle he's alive. He's getting around great. Right. So he takes me down just a few blocks from there, and there it says William Carey's church right over the top of this gate. Okay. And right, it's a very large courtyard, and then you can see the church at the end of it. Very, very old looking. The original church that William Carey preached in is in the inside. And inside that building, yes, the original foundations, walls, and everything is inside there, but it's much bigger now.
Sure.
Years and years they've done a lot with it, but there's plaques all over. There's plaques that show every single preacher that's ever been ordained to be the pastor there.
Oh, neat.
And there's plaques that say 100 years ago, which would have been 100 years after William Carey.
Right.
There's this cracked plaque, and it's saying that this is when it was dedicated to this and all. So you see this First Baptist Church, It's
so there must have been, pastor after pastor after pastor then.
There's just a whole list of them.
Oh, wow.
Whole list, and you got William Carey at the top.
That's cool.
So there's also a library, and part of the college is kind of off to the right. There's a building there. And we went in, we looked at the library. He introduced me to a few people. He had one young student come out that he didn't even recognize, that he had known when he was a kid, and came up to Taran and said, "Do you remember me?" Right. So Taran tells us a story about how he had gotten off of a bus and gone down the wrong street and was just wandering and found a group of people preaching many years back, and they were right outside that gate that we stood at, and he had heard them preaching, got invited in, and he tells a story about the guy witnessing to him, and Taran was convicted and asking him if he was even if he was a sinner. And Taran had not answered, and later gotten a hold of him and said, "No, I'm not a sinner. I'm not a sinner." And Taran believed, well, he was part of a priestly family.
Right.
He wasn't himself trained to be part of the priesthood,
okay,
but he was part of that.
He was part of that.
And so he came from that background. So to come out of that was a big deal. Your family casts you out.
So this was like more of the caste system, sort of.
Yes.
I'm born into the priest caste, so I have
Yes.
to be a priest kind of thing.
That was his caste. So that's what he had to come out of when he became a Christian. It was a big deal for him, and then to be trained. But it was all because of William Carey's church.
Right.
So it was neat for him to take me around. He showed me the new pastor. We went in. The pastor remembers John Nelms. He said 15 years ago. And he
Has it been that long?
He looks like a pretty young man, but this guy, he said 15 years ago was when he met him. He's the pastor now.
Wow.
So they took me inside. I got to see inside the sanctuary. Right now the pulpit sits at one end and the pews all face that way, and there's this baptistry that's under these wood planks. And he told me, however the story goes, I vaguely remember something about Corrie ten Boom being in India, but I had forgotten. So supposedly she was baptized right there. And I got to see right under those planks, we were standing on top of them. They said this baptistry is where she was baptized, but we just used it like a couple weeks ago. So, there's still people being saved and baptized.
Wow.
And then right to the left, you see two plaques above each other. You see one for William Carey and you see one for Adoniram Judson. And the pulpit sat right there. And so they took me out. He showed me the actual pulpit. And he said, William Carey was a pretty tall man. He said, I think he was taller than you. But he said he used this pulpit here. It's a real dark black pulpit, and it was made specially for him. So it was a real privilege to see that. What was awesome was to be able to get his interview. You guys asked me to see if I could get an interview with Taran.
Right.
And so we set it up with a couple of chairs. We hauled them right outside the church. And it was just it was just an honor to sit there on that cobblestone courtyard right outside the church doors.
So much history there.
Yeah, so you can feel that around you. You see the college students getting done, walking by, and me and Taran are just sitting there, and I'm asking him to tell me his story. And so he tells me how he got saved, tell me all this. And then I stopped the camera and I started again, and I said, could you just tell some stories about just how you witness to Hindus, how you witness to a Muslim, And so we started talking more and more about Hinduism. When I was on this trip, any spare moment I had, especially during one part of the trip, I had my afternoons more free. And so I would just immerse myself in Hinduism, trying to understand the culture, trying to understand these 80-foot idols that are around my hotel, Mm-hmm. I mean, you get into some places and you can feel the darkness. Yeah. You can feel it's deeper here. I've stepped into a place where this is rougher territory, and the people are darker here. Their hearts have been just made much darker. Mm-hmm. And so I got to know, well, which God is a part of this territory? Which devil is behind this, and what's his name?
What you need?
What are they worshiping him for? What does he offer? And it was very interesting. And so I was able to talk to him about some stuff. And one of the neatest things is we could do a video about this sometime. It's what your dad was talking about to me. And there is, in the very first Rig Veda, there's 4 Vedas, and Brahman is really the main god. And so from the 4 mouths or the 4 heads of Brahman come these 4 Vedas, and they say that Sanskrit, they say this is older than all the other religions. But the very first one mentions a god, which I don't have the name with me right now, but
there's the supreme god.
Taran found this, and several others have found it too. They said, well, this god came and died for the people. And he died for the sins of the people. There's no other God that's ever mentioned where it takes away the sins of the people.
Yeah.
And what you find is there's these prophecies about this God saying he will come and he will be virgin born. He will die for the people. He'll be a substitutionary death. And Taran started asking, why is this God not worshipped? Yeah. Why do we hear nothing about him? He can take away my sins. Mm-hmm. And this is how he would start witnessing. He said, look, I found this. This is in our writings. This is in the Rig Veda. Who is this Savior? He's a Savior. Mm-hmm. And so that's huge to find that in the Hindu religion. Yeah. And you can find information on that. It's easy to look that up.
Yeah.
But it's amazing. There's not just a couple. I mean, there's like 10 or more specific prophecies that are given that Jesus fulfills. And it's him. I mean, it's so obvious. And he got so excited about this. So he showed me this. We talked about it for a while. And it was so neat just to be sitting outside William Carey's church. There's big storm clouds rolling in. There's rain coming and everything. And you can hear thunder in the distance. And we're sitting outside this church just talking about Hinduism and Christianity.
Yeah.
With this old 70-year-old man that got saved here. So it was beautiful just to be in Calcutta.
For your next family vacation or church missions project, join us for a 1-week visionary trip to Honduras. You'll visit rural churches and homes of poor and destitute families and serve children in our feeding centers. You'll even have a chance to travel to villages so remote, no vehicle can reach them. It's a genuine third world experience, minus the discomfort. With safe and comfortable accommodations for individual families or church groups, letting you and your young person catch a glimpse of the world of missions outside the U.S. To plan your own custom-made missionary adventure, visit finalfrontiers.world.
Hello, this is Joshua Martin, and today on the podcast I have Tiffany Byram. She's a Harvest Baptist Bible College student in Fort Dodge, Iowa. I met her along with a lot of other students there at the Ignite conference that just took place not that long ago. We were able to teach on missions, and it was an exciting time. Several people came up to me. Some people came up and talked about sign language. Some people came up and talked about other countries that they had been to, or I had one lady come up and talk about nursing, but Tiffany came up to me right after a session I did on Islam. And she started asking questions about that. And we talked about Azerbaijan. We talked about the Islamic faith. And I got to find out that she had been in 6 missions trips around the world. Mm-hmm. And that's exciting for someone who is in Bible college. Do you meet many other people anywhere that have been on 6 different trips, Tiffany?
Not really outside of my church, no.
You had said that your church is very missions-minded. You're from Washington State, and that you grew up kind of in a city that was multicultural. There were a lot of refugees. Is that right?
Yeah. There's a lot of refugees that come in because we have a big international airport there.
Sure. So you get a lot of people from diverse places then.
Mm-hmm.
You have a lot of them in your church as well?
Yeah. I would say if you come in on a Sunday morning, probably 3/4 of the crowd is not going to be white, maybe more. Depends on the week, I guess. So I grew up with mostly not white people. I love it. I miss it.
So you had the opportunities growing up then to be able to start taking a lot of trips. How old were you when you took your first missions trip?
I was 15. I went to Mexico, and it was a week long, if I'm remembering correctly.
Okay, so that was your first opportunity. Do you remember about what you did there?
I remember that we went out soul winning a few times. I got to meet the youth in the church. I remember spending a lot of time with the youth in the church. And it's honestly really vague memories other than that. I do remember doing some sightseeing for one day, too. And we went on, like, a zip line, like a container, over the city. And we looked over the whole city. And it was pretty cool. I remember wishing I was down in the city and getting to talk to people instead of being above the city and looking at it.
Well, you've got me beat. I think my first missions trip was when I was 17, but I also went to Mexico. So you went when you were 15 years old, and that was your very first one. But after that, then you went to where?
Guatemala,
right. Okay.
Yeah.
And so that was a bit longer trip for you. But this is exciting. I'm hoping that young ladies out there will listen to this and they'll get excited. You love missions, and I don't see that everywhere. And so I'm hoping that that will kind of rub off on people. You've taken trips. Here you are. You've got the courage to go ahead and head out, and the desire to see other countries, the desire to just get involved in missions. And that's what I want to portray today. I'm hoping that some young ladies out there are listening to this. So tell us about Guatemala.
I stayed there for 2 months. I went there on my own. I hadn't met anybody there before, but my parents knew the missionaries' family that we went to, and so I didn't speak the language. I mean, I didn't speak really much Spanish at all when I went there. For the first month and a half, I basically couldn't communicate, so my goal was more to help the missionary's wife.
Okay.
I think they had 5 little girls, and so I wanted to help in the school and whatever, because obviously like a mom with 5 little girls is pretty bogged down by being a mom and not able to do as much ministry, so that was what I really hoped to do when I was there.
What was that like, stepping into a completely different culture, nobody that you knew at all?
It was pretty crazy. I've never been away from my family at all because I have so many siblings that everywhere I went, I had at least one sibling with me. And so it was weird to just be at home with my family and then be gone in another place and, of course, not speaking the same language. And I remember when all these girls didn't know what to do with me because they felt like I was different from them, and I was the one feeling insecure. Like, I don't know how to communicate with them. And the missionary's wife came to me and said, they think that you're cooler than them because you're an American. Like, you have to be the one to reach out. And I was like, what? They're cooler than me. They speak Spanish. So it was kind of interesting for me to realize that as an American, people will not think I'm better, but you know what I'm saying?
That's so true.
Like, yeah, it was weird when I realized that they're just normal people that are somehow intimidated by me when I'm intimidated by them.
Yeah, that's something that people don't think about, especially if you're like a teenager at the age that you went to Guatemala.
Right. I felt like a really awkward third wheel pretty much everywhere I went because I didn't speak the language. So everybody else just kind of like looked at me and talked, and I didn't know what they were saying. But it was a good experience. I did learn the language, so...
Wow, you picked up on Spanish pretty fast?
I did. I mean, by the time that I left, I could carry on a good conversation.
Wow.
I remember a couple weeks before I left, there was this lady that talked to me the first day I came there, and we literally spoke in sign language, pretty much. And then before I left, we talked, and we had this 30-minute conversation, and I was so happy.
Wow, that's really something. That's a gift. God gave that to you while you were there. That doesn't happen for a lot of people. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of countries out there where you wouldn't realize that Americans are looked up to. There are some places where they're not, but
right.
It's true that they do respect us a lot more.
Mm-hmm.
I remember you talking about the Philippines. You said some of the things that you were able to accomplish more that stick out in your mind was the times that you were able to visit the Philippines.
Well, I took 2 trips to the Philippines. I'm trying to think of the things that were the most exciting when I went there, just because I remember them just being a blur of doing so much. But I remember going out soul winning, and we would just sit down and witness to like a crowd of kids or even a crowd of adults, and people would just gather around and listen to you, and so many people would get saved. I remember having dozens of people saved just walking around in like little towns. And our church was part of starting churches. I think both trips we helped start a church. And the national missionary, he told us that when we came and spent a week canvassing the area and put on a big day for them, it only took him about a year and a half to move on to the next church. So my church has actually gone, I think, 3 or 4 times now. So we go like every other year and help this missionary start a new church now. So for me, that's been really exciting that we're leaving churches there.
Yeah, that's what it's all about. That's so awesome that you got to actually see that and that your church caught that vision of planting a church. That's what we're about at Final Frontiers. We have people that are specifically involved in church planting. That is their gift, their calling. And so you got to see that. You got to see a national preacher working. You got to see an actual church started when you go. Man, that's exciting. And that's what we do when we go down into Honduras, too. If someone comes for a visionary trip during the summer, we'll tell them, hey, you can actually be a part of starting a church. If you come, you can be involved in that.
It's crazy. And then you go to the church on Sunday, and they have 150 people from this little tiny village. Everybody walks in, and it's just so cool. Like, they get so excited that you're there. It's so fun.
If you were to talk about culture shock, what was that like in the Philippines? Anything?
Philippines is very nice. Everybody's very nice. Everybody's very sweet-spirited. Of everywhere I've been, I think I liked the Philippines the most, enjoying it the most. There was never a negative culture shock at all. People feed you everywhere you go, so much food. And they welcome you, and they get so excited, want to take pictures with you. And
You're probably like me, where if I go into a place, I imagine myself that my skin is dark, and I forget about it.
Right?
And if I see another white person walking around, I think, oh my word, what are they doing here? Yeah, and I don't want to talk to them. I feel like I'm,
I know. When I was in Guatemala the first time I saw a white family, I was like, who are they? Why are they here? And I was like, wait, I'm white. Like, who am I? What am I doing here? What's wrong with me?
Yeah, I definitely know that feeling. Now, you've been to Africa too, right? What country did you go to?
Zambia.
Wow, okay. And that's probably one of your more recent trips.
Yeah, that was last year.
So you have really been around. Is there anything that you would like to tell to other young women out there? Maybe they want to take a missions trip. What could you say to them about that?
I would say it's totally worth it first. I don't think I've ever gone on a trip and thought that was a waste of time and money. There have been hard trips or trips where I messed things up, but it was never not worth it. Because even if I felt like I wasn't helping other people, God was still growing me by putting me into such a different place, you know?
Yeah.
I would say that a lot of times we have a lot more influence overseas than we might have here in the States. At least me personally, I'm more comfortable with people overseas a lot of the time. And so I found that the countries I've been to, just because we're from America, we speak English, they want to hear you, they want to talk to you. And so you actually have the chance to reach out to people in a way that you don't always get in the States, just because everyone in the States is not going to crowd around you and want to know what you have to say. You have a lot more opportunity to help disciple people and to give out the gospel. That would be what I would say. So you should try it. Even if you don't, you're going to be a missionary.
Yeah. People are so much more hungry over there. And like you said, you actually get to see a church started in some cases.
Right. You can see a lot happen in a short amount of time. It's kind of like if you get bored with what you're doing here, then just go overseas. You'll see something more interesting.
I would also like to say to parents that are out there listening, hey, here is a young lady that her parents allowed her to go on 6 different trips by the time that she was in college. Both of us could testify to this. This is something I was able to do. This is something Tiffany was able to do. Let your kids do it. It is a life-changing thing. It changes their perspective on life, being able to go and experience the third world and see how people live, but it also changes your life forever. And it's an amazing influence.
I've seen so many people go on missions trips and come back so different. Change them a lot. It inspires you to change something at your church back home, to be more like those people you saw who were more dedicated.
Yeah.
I feel like.
There's opportunities at Final Frontiers for people who want to get involved. Like I said earlier, we have the visionary trips, and so if a family wants to come, we can set up a time for you to be able to visit the last unreached group in Honduras and go around to poor families and see how these villages lived, see a church started. You can do that in Honduras. And then also, if there's someone out there who is in college and you want internship opportunities, that's something that we can offer at Final Frontiers here. So you can actually go to Honduras or go to India or go to Africa. We can set that up for you as well.
You know, when you're young, people do give money. Unsaved people will give money for a trip overseas. That's something I feel like a lot of people don't realize. So if you're 15, 17, 18, even like 20, when you say, I want to go to wherever, everybody feels like it's educational to go overseas. And so it's not as hard to raise money for that stuff as you might think. Some people don't realize that.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, we even did just car washes when we were going to go on our first one from my church. Yeah, there's a lot of ways to do it.
Mm-hmm. Other than that, just go. It's amazing. It's way better than being here in the States.
Good advice. Good advice. Okay, thank you. Thank you so much for talking to us today and sharing your heart.
Mm-hmm, thank you.
At Final Frontiers, AMT aspires to advance missions through technology, and their Power Pack is a device that has done just that. It's a portable video projector and screen with its own battery and PA system that is lightweight and durable and can all fit in a backpack. This allows a missionary to draw in crowds with a gospel film and proclaim a message over speakers in places where there is no electricity. To help us deploy these to eager preachers around the world, visit finalfrontiers.world.
Your inquiries and comments are important to us. If you have questions or perhaps subject matter you would like to have addressed on this show, please visit us at finalfrontiers.world.
Back in 1986, when I began promoting the idea of supporting national preachers to reach their own people, I ran into great opposition, not from missionaries. They knew firsthand the advantages the national preachers had to reach their own families and neighbors. But some mission leaders were opposed to the idea and publicly ridiculed the national preachers, saying they were ignorant or lazy or were just rice Christians. That was a popular term used to denigrate national preachers as being servants to any faith that would feed them. Churches slowly began to accept my arguments on behalf of supporting national missionaries. It was logical and biblical and unarguably effective. Even the Apostle Paul did it. Some critics said we were trying to change missions, but we were really just trying to bring it back to its biblical roots. Missions had changed 200 years earlier when mission boards and churches determined that only an American or European could be supported as a missionary. The national preachers, if helped at all, were relegated to being their drivers and servants. Well-meaning boards created the modern method of missions, and while it has worked, it is not nearly as effective as the biblical method. After World War II, missionaries flocked to the Philippines, having served there in war and fallen in love with the people. 30 years later, in 1975, their numbers had grown to about 3,000 missionaries. Coincidentally, there were about 3,000 churches as well. But over the next 30 years, death, retirement, and the attraction of other lands saw their numbers decrease. Finally, in 2005, only 118 of the 3,000 missionaries remained. But yet, the number of churches had increased to 55,000. Now, if it took 3 decades for 3,000 missionaries to start 3,000 churches, then how, in the following 3 decades, could just 118 missionaries start 52,000 churches? The short answer is they couldn't and they didn't. It was done primarily by the nationals they had won to Christ and discipled, who had then duplicated the missionaries' efforts and produced a great and expanding harvest. I'm John Nelms. To learn more about missions, order a copy of my book, The Great Omission, on our website at finalfrontiers.world.
This is an article from our recent second quarter 2018 progress report, which you can view online at finalfrontiers.world. I thought you would be interested to hear about how the support of our national church planners brings them educational material to continue to grow them spiritually. Missionary Randall Starwalt and his wife Phyllis, who serve in Kenya and Uganda, have partnered with Final Frontiers for more than 25 years. They have a tremendous ministry that includes church planting, Bible institutes, youth camps, and evangelism. The Starwalts help Final Frontiers by referring us to national preachers they personally know who meet our core qualifications. Doctrinally sound, morally pure, with a verifiable track record of starting new churches and training men for the ministry. In fact, we don't even consider a man for support unless he has already started at least 2 churches. Even most of the students who are enrolled in our Timothy program have already started a church. We call them students because they have not finished their primary training or been ordained yet, and part of their training includes starting a church. It is logical to think that a student is a student because he has not yet done the work of the ministry. But since we are funding these men, and we do not want to lift up a novice only to see him fall, we require them to have experience as a church planter, just to be considered a Timothy. Randy tells us that in Kenya, 80% of those in boarding schools are separated from their families. Having youth camp for them to attend when school is out gives us an opportunity to teach them the Word of God and allows them to make lifelong friends and perhaps find a spouse. It is also a tremendous evangelism tool. During December, Randy's Fellowship of Churches, which he and his men have started, hosted 14 youth camps with an attendance of 3,050 teenagers. 145 received Christ, and hundreds dedicated their lives for God's will to be done in their lives. But being a biblical missionary, meaning a church planter and discipler, Randy is always busy training men for the ministry, then taking them out to plant new churches. As a result of this mentoring, these men go out on their own, taking their Timothys with them. It is common in his monthly prayer letters that he will show photos of new churches being planted or special services. Established churches have their congregations stand in front of the brick auditorium they constructed, while new works show members posing in front of mud and stick structures. One of these new churches was started by a young man who had accepted Christ in a church that Randy or one of his men had started. After finishing the Bible Institute, he went back to his home village of Sigor and started this church. Last May, Randy sent us this photo with a note saying that this church had already started 5 more churches, and they had 4 of their young men studying in the Bible Institute. They were expecting another 5 churches to be started in the next 2 years. Randy started 7 Bible institutes, and each year we partner with him by providing the funds to print the curriculum they need, some 500 copies. He is always faithful to send us a photograph of each graduating class, and you can view them online in our progress report. Randy sent in this report to say thank you to us for providing the curriculum, so we relay this thank you to all of you who gave us the funds to do so. Part of your preacher's support actually goes to providing them with their needed curriculum. We first began supporting Randy's ministry when he had just 12 churches. He now has over 600. He credits that growth to our support, but I say it is his attention to detail and his devotion to his people, not to mention Phyllis's angel-like character that has brought such success. May God give us 1,000 more. Randy and Phyllis are both from Missouri and came to Christ as children as a result of the bus ministry. In their 30-plus years of ministry work, they've trained over 450 men for the ministry, 154 of whom are supported by Final Frontiers. Together with their men, they have started over 600 churches, some rural, some urban, ranging in attendance from 35 to over 2,000. He says that the typical church will have 150 to 200 in attendance. That means his ministry each Sunday has more than 1 million in attendance at a church they are responsible for starting. You can help them do more by supporting one of their preachers. Contact us and we'll make it happen. Extended interviews of Randy can be heard on other podcast episodes. See the pictures that went along with this article in our second quarter 2018 progress report online at finalfrontiers.world.
You've been listening to the Final Frontiers radio show, funded by sponsors like you. Thank you so much for joining us. Through the funding of national and native preachers, we endeavor to effectively advance the gospel where it has never been preached before. If you want more information, visit www.finalfrontiers.world. That's finalfrontiers.world.